Hey there team, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to another installment of Road to Game of the Year, sort of a weekly experiment that's been well received, so we're sticking with it. For those not across it, this year I've decided to step into reviewing in full what sort of started as a meme knee-jerk reaction to the fact that I don't really like a lot of reviewers in the space, so I thought I'd throw my hat in the ring and give it a go, and lo and behold, seems people are enjoying it. Daily I do overviews or reviews, and on average I do about 2 reviews a week, and if I do that for say 50 weeks a year, that should result in 100 reviews in the year. It's a bit of a big task, but the hope is that I can kind of rank them in order of preference. And so this video serves twofold, in to summarize what we looked at in the week, and you could go back and check those videos if you want to go a bit more in depth, and also a bit of a running journey, dare I say, a road to Game of the Year, as we sift and sort through the stuff that comes across my desk. So kicking off overviews, very briefly, we did an overview of Subterrain, Minds of Titan, which I then went on to do an actual review by the end of the week because I was so impressed with my first 2 hours with it. Spoiler alert, it didn't really stay that way, but we'll get to that in the review segment. Next was Goblin Stone, which was just not very good, to be perfectly honest. It looked promising, it looked interesting, I like the art, I like the theme, but in execution it was kind of just not just clunky, but tragically kind of dull. On paper, had all the moving parts. In execution, it didn't have the magic sort of sauce. I know that sort of talk can be very difficult to put your finger on, and again, you can check the video to see more in depth, but it's not with hate in my heart or anything like that when I say that I just don't think it's a particularly good game, but there's no need to retread, and I'm not trying to bash, so let's move on. The final overview was Outcast, A New Beginning. I'm very impressed with this game. In fact, I was planning on reviewing it, but it's very long, and the way that I do reviews is against a fixed price point, which, wait to the end of the video, we might talk about adjusting that. So the hope is to review it perhaps early next week, push it into the next week like I've done previously with reviews. Yes, just very broadly, very impressive. I've put quite a few hours into it already because I am chipping away at reviewing it, and my opinion hasn't changed. The long and short of the high-end thought that I came away from this game with was the weird sort of logarithmic curve of putting money into games as they approach the AAA threshold, and it's just expected. AAA companies hold their hand out and say, pay me this much money because I'm this company, or because I promise you super high fidelity sweat pours on the face of the character that you're never going to look at, and it doesn't really impact the experience at all. This game is doing AA as good as AA could be done. It's filled with Eurojank, but it's still a great big open world that is really fun to play, and at the end of the day, it's a high quality game that I really, really love. And is it so unfair for it to ask a AAA price? So yeah, if anything for me, this sort of shed light on the idea that we have been kind of gaslit, I think. That's not to say that all AAA games are bad, but the king's share of them are very comfortable putting all of their money, 90% of their budget, into higher fidelity graphics, and yet stagnating in the gameplay department. Checking the comments from that video, it seems I'm not the only one that feels that way. I think as long as you give us a fun game, there is a chunk of at least my audience that seems pretty happy to kind of throw that money at that experience. Dare I say, vote with your wallet in the other direction. So yeah, look out for a review of that on the channel in the coming days. That's the hope, that's the plan. All right, so they're the overviews. As far as reviews go, I try and get through 2 a week. I started this system a little bit later into the year. I'd already reviewed a few games. So what I've been doing is going through 3 per week as a bit of a catch-up mechanic. Review 2, catch-up 1 from the backlog. Last week I was running a little bit behind. I was only able to review 1 game. So I ended up doing 3 this week as Unicorn Overlord kicked in to this week. And so I guess we might as well start off the list with that, Unicorn Overlord. Now look, I'll just be clear, it's a great game. It's a vanillaware game, it's fantastic, it's very much in the genre of Fire Emblem, and it's not going to sell you if you're not a fan of that, right? So if you've bounced off Fire Emblem, Advance Wars, Ogre Tactics, all these sort of games, keep moving, right? Even though this game is beautiful and gorgeous, and in general it's just a very high production version of that genre, it is still that. And I'll be honest, and I touched on it briefly in the review, but your mileage is going to vary depending on how much you are willing to kind of just grind hard on that same mechanic. And to be honest, being such a variety gamer myself, it did wear me down a fair bit. Now, that's not in any way saying it's bad, but a more sort of extreme example to illustrate would be people's tolerance for MMOs, right? I find most MMOs very dull, and collecting 10 boar pelts over and over again really wears its welcome out for me. But at the same time, they're popular for a reason. There is an absolute huge following that enjoys them. So I can recognize that the loop in Unicorn Overlord is solid. It is also 100 hours of that same loop. And for some people, that's absolute delight. Celebrate, wonderful. For me, I don't know. I don't know if I can put much more hours into it. If you were to check my review though, I got a lot of pushback on that, being my hot take on translations or localizations, and oh my god, the amount of sad cunts trying to lecture me the difference between the two. I don't care. I'm a consumer, and I'm on the consumer end of the equation. I'm not really interested in carrying water for my favorite localization or translation team. But people seem to take issue with the fact that I raised the, well, I suppose iconic vanillaware localization style in English is very flowery in its language. And I mused that there's kind of no way that the original Japanese team would want that or even potentially understand that as the final product. Now look, it could be an exception to the rule. That's true, and I'll concede that. Remember, the nature of me putting out a video and then you sending me a million comments is it's almost like sending letters. So, okay, I understand what people are saying, and sure, maybe there is, in fact, some sort of arrangement where the original Japanese-speaking developers fully understand and comprehend the nuances of Shakespearean English and have decided, in the exception of that one localization, out of all the bloody dozens of languages, they're happy for that localization team to take artistic flourish and change it. Maybe. Maybe not. The truth is, we'll never know. But when I say exception, the rule in the localization world these days, well, not even these days, it's been going on for years. It's just that they have pushed so far in taking artistic license with injecting all sorts of nonsense bullshit into translations into English, right under the noses of these Japanese companies who, honestly, in a lot of cases, don't know this is going on because they don't understand. It is a trust being abused when there is a language barrier and the translator is deciding to insert stuff that shouldn't be there. And it has come to light, and people even like me are aware of it, that they have pushed it and pushed it and pushed it so far that people are getting fed up with it. So yes, maybe this is the exception. Maybe. But generally speaking, the rule is to assume that localizers making any sort of changes are beyond the scope of what the original Japanese intent was. This is my position, this is what I stated, and this is what I hold to. The real tragedy were the people saying, but I don't mind. And that hurts my soul, truly. It's all good and well for me to yell and scream about having some sort of Western ideology injected into a translation. That's an easy battle to fight. But if you are of principle, of just don't touch the original intent of the creator, then you should fight the fight even when it goes favorably for you, if you are of principle. At least that's how I see it. So sure, the translation is well done, it's well written, and the flowery English is not bad. I never said it was. In fact, I said this before and I stand by it now. It's very good, but that doesn't change the fact that, as a rule, I am against localizers, translators, whatever fucking fancy name you want to give them. I am generally against them taking any sort of flourish and messing with the original intent, because we are seeing time and time again bad actors doing it. I'm sure there's a point in here I could make about someone saying that they wouldn't mind being jailed as long as their jailers were nice to them, but I think this might fly over some people's heads. Regardless, it's a good game. It's an okay game for an audience that likes it. It's not going to change your mind. Next up is Backpack Battles, which kind of snuck up on me. It released like right at the end of last week. I picked it up on a whim and then I accidentally sunk 10 hours into it. So that sort of speaks volumes. What a wonderful game. Addicting as anything. People's knee-jerk reactions looking at it might be that it's ripping off the style and aesthetic of something else called Backpack Hero. Perhaps you could say that. I don't really know the history, but I can tell you that they're both radically different games. This is much more like Super Auto Pets. Asymmetric, multiplayer that's more about build your backpack synergies and then put it into an idle showdown. And the build variety and just general gameplay loop is wonderful and addicting as anything. And I would highly recommend you picking it up, especially if you're looking for one of those in-between games. Maybe you're listening to Spotify while you chip away at something kind of thing. And then last and tragically least is Subterrain Mines of Titan. So, as a rule, I try not to get too hyped about games, and I can kind of get away with it when I'm reviewing a billion different games and I get given a lot of keys. I understand it's a little bit different for me. I see a game, I like it, I'm gonna play it, that's the end of it. In this case, though, I was a bit hyped. I really enjoyed the first Subterrain. It does some unusual overworld doom timers, managing a base that's self-destructing, essentially, and a lot of busy work-driven stuff. Very much enjoyed the first game. Played the demo of this a while back and was quite impressed with the direction they were going. They were holding a lot of the principles, and it's not exactly a direct sequel. And then I did the overview earlier in the week. Again, quite impressed, but once I put a few more hours into it for review, it all sort of started to fall apart. A lot of the things that I championed about it, as in being objective, concept-driven, like the narrative emerges by you need to protect the base, it's going to be invaded, you need to delve deeper, figure out what went wrong, that sort of stuff, is immediately undermined by these weird character-driven fucking interpersonal romance subplots that the game introduced at the 2.5 hour mark. Made me vom in my mouth a little bit. It's also quite broken, buggy, and check the review because I don't need to retread, but the developer is now reversing a lot of his, avant-garde type mechanics, right? I love the idea of indie games pushing new things and trying to get auteurs, that sort of stuff, but every time that an indie just folds and bends over because they get backlash against their unusual mechanic, that just hurts my heart very much so. I would not even be surprised if this dev, on the folding and that I've seen due to backlash against his mechanics, I wouldn't be surprised if I saw him remove the Doom timer altogether as well. Let's see. Let's see if he proves me right or wrong. But yeah, what an absolute tragedy. A game full of promise that sort of died a death from 1,000 cuts. Anyway, that's my sort of week in review. It occurs to me I wasn't actually ranking those games as I went, which is what I normally do. You're going to have to bear with me. I'm still working out the format. I will, at the end of this, have a running list of the current ranking and where it's all sitting at the moment. A couple of orders of business here on the end while I've got you for those curious. One, I'm contemplating narrowing my niche with reviews down to Steam only. Unicorn Overlord was actually a bit of a fuck around getting that sorted and set up, and it's a PS5 exclusive. And the honest truth is, most PlayStation games are going to end up on Steam. Most Epic exclusive games are going to end up on Steam. Nintendo's a bit of an exception, but I don't really play Nintendo games. I'm not that super interested in playing Mario 17 where the dude jumps again. Like, I know that's derivative and a bit cheeky. If you enjoy Mario, fill your boot. But that whole Nintendo aesthetic and the fact that they just keep making the same game for full price doesn't really appeal to me a whole lot. I guess the other thing, you play Ubisoft. Against all odds, I quite enjoy a lot of Ubisoft releases, but they're also doing some weird shenanigans back and forth with Steam releases. I noticed today that they put For Honor on the Steam storefront, so I don't know what they're doing, but they're clearly A/B testing with us, and I don't really know how I feel about that. But look, at the end of the day, is it really going to hurt me that much if all I do is just cover Steam games? I'm never going to run out of games. I'm already struggling to cover everything as it is. And you could argue even under that sort of auspice, I would probably still be spread too thin. So that's something I'm thinking about doing going forward, but I'd be curious to hear people's feedback. At the end of the day, there are too many games for me to review anyway, so narrowing my scope makes a lot of sense. The second order of business is along those lines of narrowing scope. So these days, I run this channel. I also work a full-time job, not to go into it too personally, but this channel started doing fairly well when I just did Let's Plays. I kind of got bored just running a channel and wanted more because that's how I am. I've had multiple careers that have been successful in the past. Yeah, good for me. And then I did the whole learn to code. Now, granted, from my engineering background, I already knew how to code a fair bit in certain things like MATLAB, but I've essentially become a systems architect. I'm still relatively junior. It's only been like a couple of years. I have a full-time job doing all that sort of stuff as well. And I'm enjoying it immensely, but I barely have enough time to keep up with this 2 reviews a week. On top of that, and I haven't gotten into it too much on the channel, but all the sweet baby, DEI, that sort of stuff. There's a lot of rumbling going on in the game space, in the industry, and everyone's taking their own take away from that. And to me, my main take was, if all these ideologues that sit around and just kind of do nothing in these games companies, and yet they still manage to make out and put out the best games that we have, surely I could make a game. And so a part of me feels maybe there's room for the whole step up, put up, that kind of thing. So I've downloaded Unity, and I've already spent some of my spare time this week and learning camera controls and importing textures and making rooms and that sort of stuff. And much to my surprise, it's actually quite graspable for someone who already has a heavy coding background. I don't want to say it's easy, geez, not at all, because the hard part for me is going to be art and characters and all that sort of stuff, because I do not really have an artistic bone in my body. I am an engineer to the core. But as far as the actual getting everything to work behind the scenes and relearning C#, I mean, I did C+ back in the day. It's been interesting. But what am I getting at? My point is, I spread myself too thin. I just take on a lot of stuff, and there's not enough hours in my life. And so I don't know what this means. I've thought about reshaping the way that I do reviews. I already do overviews for 2 hours a piece. I'm thinking about maybe I put X hours into a game and that's it. Everything gets reviewed. I don't care if you pay $100 or $10. Maybe every game gets 8 hours and that's it. And that's enough to render a review, because at the end of the day, that is, right? People come here for my opinion, and presumably because it aligns fairly well with them. Do you really think that my opinion of a game is going to change much more after the 8-hour mark or the 80-hour mark? I don't know. I mean, I've been very open about the fact that I kind of barely clock games, such as the nature of when you're trying to cover as many different games as possible. Perhaps I go in the other direction and I really strip it back and become like a 1 video a week kind of do. Maybe I only do 1 review a week. But the truth is, I'm looking to reform a little bit on the channel. I do love it. I very much enjoy it. But even with the 2 kind of jobs that I have, I seriously fall short with hours, and you can already see that I'm starting to kick reviews forward into the next week. This model needs to change. I actually really would like to make a bit more space in the trifecta of jobs and potentially play with a bit of game dev, at least to understand how it works a bit more. Anyway, a little bit more personal, a little bit more behind the curtain. I would be willing to hear what people have to say around that. I'm not giving the channel up entirely and stopping reviews full stop, but I am looking at reworking what I'm doing here. I mean, even in the pursuit of game dev, like if I were to pick a particular genre, for example, I'm leaning towards a survival horror. I kind of want to go back and play all my favorite survival horror games and that. And at the moment, there's just really no scope in my schedule to do that. I eat, sleep, and work. Boo-hoo, poor me, these are the decisions you made, but my point is that this might actually impact you, the end user, in the way that we do the channel. Anyway, I just thought I'd share that on the end, and if anyone has any thoughts or feedbacks around that, I would be willing to hear it out.